I am Dark Files, and for this video, I have 5 Dogman encounter stories that are allegedly true stories. I personally think that the last one is the scariest, but let me know in the comments which was the scariest for you. Now sit back, relax, and let's begin. The forest was supposed to be safe. That's what we told ourselves when we ignored the map, when we veered off the marked trail in favor of something more exciting, more wild. We had no idea what we were walking into. There were 4 of us, me, Jake, Lauren and Chris. We'd planned this trip for months, driving up from Detroit to explore Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a long weekend of hiking, camping, and getting away from everything. Jake had the idea to go off-trail, Cam on Maine, he had said, grinning as he adjusted his pack. The real adventure is where people don't go. Chris, ever the cautious one, had hesitated. Park rangers put those trails there for a reason, dude. But in the end, peer pressure won. It always did. The deeper we went, the quieter the world became. No distant voices from other hikers, no sounds of cars from the nearby road, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig beneath our boots. For a while, it was thrilling. Then we found the clearing. It was a wide open patch of land, hidden deep in the forest, too perfect, too circular, like something had cleared it deliberately. And in the center, bones, dozens of them, scattered like fallen leaves. Some were small, animal-like, but others were too large, too human. A chill crawled down my spine as I stepped closer, my breath fogging in the crisp air. Jake crouched down, poking at a skull, half buried in the dirt. Dude, this is insane. Chris wasn't amused. We need to go, now. Lauren had her phone out, snapping pictures. If this is some kind of crime scene, shouldn't we? A branch cracked, somewhere, beyond the trees. The 4 of us froze. The air changed. The wind had stopped. The leaves now still. The only sound was our own breathing. Then, from the shadows, a low, heavy exhale. Something was watching us. Something big. And then, in the distance, the sun started to set. We were not alone. We stood frozen, our breath shallow, ears straining for any sign of movement. Nothing, just the trees, towering and silent, their branches swaying slightly in the fading light. Then, another sound. Not a footstep, not an animal. A deep, guttural sniffing, like something smelling the air. Lauren's hand tightened around her phone. What was that? She whispered. Jake forced a chuckle, but I could hear the shake in it. Probably a deer. Chris turned to him, eyes wide. That's not a deer. I swallowed hard. He was right. It was too heavy, too deliberate. Whatever it was hunting. The air had changed again, thick and oppressive. A primal fear settled in my chest, the kind that told me we weren't the predators here. We need to go, Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. Slow, quiet. None of us argued. We turned back toward the way we came, stepping lightly, careful not to crunch leaves or snap twigs. Each step felt like a gamble, like the wrong move could send whatever was watching us charging out of the darkness. But the woods were deep, and the trail, our way out, was gone. Jake turned in a slow circle. Where the hell? We came from this way, right? The forest looked different, darker. The trees pressed closer, their silhouettes shifting unnaturally in the twilight. The clearing behind us now felt like a trap, an open wound in the earth where something had been feeding. Then, a sound that made my stomach drop. A clicking, low, deliberate, like claws tapping against bark. Lauren's breath hitched. What is that? None of us answered, because we saw it, just beyond the trees, half hidden in the shadows. 2 eyes, reflective, amber bright against the dying light, too high off the ground, and staring right at us. Chris took a shaky step back. The eyes rose higher. Then a shape emerged, tall, broad, wrong, a hunched figure, covered in matted fur. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long. Its head was almost wolf-like, but not quite right. A snout that was too narrow, teeth that gleamed in the dim light. Then it smiled, and it started moving toward us. We ran. There was no plan, no direction, just blind, stupid panic. The forest blurred around me as I tore through the underbrush, branches whipping against my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard the others crashing through the trees, their footfalls frantic, uneven, and beneath that, a heavier sound, something following us. Fast, too fast. A deep guttural growl rumbled through the trees, vibrating in my chest. The kind of sound that didn't just scare you, it owned you. Lauren screamed. I turned just in time to see her stumble, her foot catching on a root. She hit the ground hard, her phone flying from her hands. Chris and I skidded to a stop, grabbing her arms, yanking her to her feet. Then Jake kept running. Jake, I shouted. But he didn't look back. And then, the growling stopped. The silence was worse. We stood there, panting, our eyes darting between the trees, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. No crunch of leaves, no shifting shadows. Then Chris whispered, "Where's Jake?" My stomach twisted. The last I'd seen, he'd been ahead of us, running. But now, the woods were still, too still. Then from somewhere deep in the trees, a sound, crunch, like a boot stepping on brittle bone. Lauren gripped my arm. "We have to find him." I nodded, forcing my legs to move. Step by step we crept forward, listening, watching. My own heartbeat pounded in my ears, but I swore I could hear it. Breathing, not ours, something else. Then I saw it. Jake's flashlight, lying on the ground, its beam flickering weakly against the roots of a massive tree. I swallowed hard, and stepped closer. Then I saw his clothes, neatly folded, like he had taken them off, one by one, like something had made him take them off. But there were no footprints, no sign of struggle, no Jake, just the trees, and in the distance, something laughing, a low breathy chuckle, that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Chris whispered, "We need to go," and for the first time I agreed, because whatever had Jake, it was playing with us. We didn't run this time. We couldn't. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't hunting us like an animal. It was toying with us. If we panicked, if we ran blindly through the dark, it would pick us off one by one, just like it had done to Jake. Chris picked up the flashlight from the ground, his hands trembling. This doesn't make sense." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Where the hell is he?" Lauren clutched my arm, her whole body shaking. "His clothes, why are they like that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just knew we had to leave. I swallowed hard, my breath frosting in the cold air. We go back the way we came. No running, no splitting up. We stay together. No one argued. We started moving, inching through the trees, the beam of Jake's flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The world around us felt wrong, the air thick and heavy, pressing down on us like we were unwanted here. Then, a branch snapped. Close, too close. Chris spun, shining the light toward the sound. The beam flickered over the trees, over the twisted roots and shifting shadows. And then, eyes, high up in the branches, two amber orbs watching, waiting. Then another set, and another, dozens of them, hidden among the trees, blinking in and out of sight. Lauren whimpered, gripping my jacket. "Oh my God." Chris's breath hitched. "How many are there?" I didn't wait to find out. "Move," I whispered. We kept walking, faster now, our steps uneven, crunching against the frozen leaves. But the eyes moved with us, tracking us, hurting us. Then from behind, a low growl. Something massive shifted in the trees. Heavy, close. I turned, and there it was. Not in the shadows, not hiding anymore. Right in front of us. The thing stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the trees. It was huge, easily 7 feet tall. Its hunched body, covered in matted fur, long arms dangled at its sides, ending in claws that twitched against the earth. But its face was the worst part. Wolf-like but not, too long, too narrow, and its mouth, grinning, stretched too wide, jagged teeth glistening in the dark. Chris sucked in a sharp breath. "That's the Dogman," I whispered, because I'd heard the stories. People in Michigan talked about it, whispered about it in bars and campfire circles. A creature that lived deep in the woods, hunting, waiting. I never believed it. Until now. It took a step forward. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine. Lauren blinked, and it charged. Run. We bolted. The dogman's roar tore through the trees, shaking the ground beneath our feet. I sprinted, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Branches whipped against my face, but I didn't stop, didn't dare. Chris was right behind me, Lauren just ahead, her panicked sobs barely audible over the thunderous footsteps pounding the earth behind us. It was fast, too fast. I could hear it gaining, crashing through the underbrush like a freight train. Breathing hard, its snarling growls turning into something worse, laughter. It was playing with us, hurting us. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. But then, up ahead, a break in the trees. The road. Lauren screamed, stumbling as she hit the gravel shoulder. Chris grabbed her, yanking her toward the edge, toward the open stretch of asphalt. I turned, my heart hammering. The dogman stood at the tree line. It didn't lunge, didn't chase. It just watched. The glow of its eyes burned through the darkness, locked onto us like it was memorizing our faces. I could see it more clearly now. Its heaving chest, the way its claws twitched, the way its long wolf-like snout curled into a grin. And then, it took a step backward, not into the shadows, just far enough to let us know. It could have killed us, but it let us go. For now, the three of us stood there, shaking, gasping for air. Lauren sobbed into her hands. Chris wiped his face, his expression hollow, shattered. Jake was gone, and we had no way to explain what had happened. But the next day, we found out. The police had already been investigating. Other hikers had gone missing in these woods. A hunter had vanished just last month. His rifle found snapped in half, his gear untouched. Some people whispered about the dogman, but no one said it out loud, because they knew, it's still out there. The diner was almost empty. When I walked in, a flickering neon sign hummed in the window, casting a sickly blue glow over the cracked linoleum floors. A lone waitress leaned against the counter, scribbling something on a napkin. A few old-timers sat hunched over their coffee, muttering in low voices. It was the kind of place where time stood still. I took a seat at the counter, rubbing the exhaustion from my eyes. I'd been on the road for nearly 14 hours, hauling freight across Michigan, and I still had another 200 miles to go before I could rest. The waitress approached, chewing gum like she was bored with life. "What'll it be on?" "Just coffee," I muttered. "Strong as you got." She nodded and poured me a cup from a pot that looked like it had been sitting there all night. I didn't care. I just needed something to keep me awake. That's when I noticed the map on the wall. A faded road map of Michigan, covered in red marker lines, routes, highways and back roads all scratched out or circled. But one in particular caught my attention, Route 47. It had been crossed out completely, thick, angry strokes of ink covering the road. "Hey," I said, pointing at it, "what's wrong with 47? The old man at the corner booth stopped talking. The waitress stiffened, her lips pressing into a thin line. One of the men, gray-haired, wearing an old hunting jacket, slowly turned in his seat. His eyes were sharp, dark. "You driving that way tonight?" I hesitated. "Yeah, why?" No one spoke. Then the waitress set down the coffee pot with a loud clunk. "You don't want to take that road." I frowned. "Why not?" She exchanged a glance with the old man before sighing, like she'd told this story too many times. "People disappear out there." The old man nodded. "Ain't been natural for a long time." Another man at the booth grunted. "Truckers mostly." I let out a dry chuckle. "You telling me it's haunted?" No one laughed. The waitress leaned in, lowering her voice. "You'll be driving through dogman territory." I blinked. "The hell's a dogman?" The hunter cleared his throat. "Big, fast, walks on two legs but ain't a man. Ain't a wolf either. Got a snout full of teeth and eyes that glow like fireflies in the dark." I raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" The waitress chewed her gum slower. "Dead serious." "All right," I sighed, taking a sip of coffee. "Let's say I believe you. What am I supposed to do if I see one?" The diner went silent. Then the old hunter said, "Don't stop. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, Don't look in the mirrors. A chill crawled up my spine. I forced out a laugh. All right, I'll keep that in mind. The waitress didn't smile. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and headed back to my truck. I wasn't the kind of guy to scare easy, but as I pulled out onto Route 47, the words "don't look in the mirrors" kept repeating in my head. I should have listened, because an hour later, something started following me. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless. Route 47 cut through miles of thick, untouched forest. No streetlights, no gas stations, no houses, just trees on either side, pressing in like silent watchers. My headlights barely cut through the darkness. The hum of the engine was the only sound, steady and familiar, keeping me grounded. I'd been driving trucks for over a decade. I'd seen weird things on the road. Drifters, shadows moving at the edges of highways, the occasional strange feeling that I wasn't alone. But this stretch of road felt wrong. The diner's warning stuck with me. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't look in the mirrors. I shook my head. Superstition. That's all it was. Then I saw it. A shape on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer. Something big hunched over just beyond the tree line. But as I got closer, my breath hitched. It was standing, not on 4 legs, on 2. A massive figure, tall and thin. Its arms hanging too low. Its posture wrong, like it wasn't used to standing like a human. I gripped the wheel tighter. My foot hovered over the brake, instinct kicking in. Maybe someone needed help. Then the headlights caught its face. And I knew. This wasn't a man. It had a snout. Long, narrow, filled with jagged teeth that glinted in the high beams. Its fur was patchy. Its chest too broad. Its fingers too long, tipped with black claws. Then it turned its head toward me. Its eyes flashed, a bright unnatural yellow, reflecting the light like an animal's, except I felt them lock onto me, felt something deep and wrong settle in my chest. I did the only thing I could. I hit the gas. The truck roared forward, tires skidding slightly on the icy road. My heart pounded in my chest as the massive figure vanished into the trees. But I wasn't stupid. It wasn't gone. It was following me. I could feel it, a weight pressing against my back, an electric dread creeping into my skin. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to check the mirrors. Then, thud, a heavy impact shook the trailer, like something had jumped onto it. The whole rig groaned, the sudden shift making the tires slide slightly. I clenched the wheel, forcing the truck forward, keeping my speed high. Another thud, closer this time. It was on the roof of my trailer. I could hear it moving, scraping across the metal, its claws digging in. A deep guttural growl rolled through the night. I broke. I glanced at the side mirror, and there it was, its face, peering over the edge of the trailer, barely illuminated by the running lights. Its mouth stretched too wide, exposing teeth meant for ripping. And then it did something I'll never forget. It smiled, a cold, deliberate grin. Then it lunged toward the cab, and I knew, if I didn't do something now, I wouldn't make it out alive. I did the only thing I could think of. I swerved. The truck lurched to the side, tires shrieking against the frozen asphalt. The weight of the trailer shifted hard, sending a violent shudder through the entire rig. For a split second, the thing lost its grip. It slid, a flash of matted fur, a glimpse of those burning yellow eyes, and then a thunderous crash as it slammed against the side of the truck. I straightened the wheel, my hands shaking. The truck roared forward, gaining speed, the tires barely holding traction on the icy road. Silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then, thud, it was back. A low growl rumbled from the roof of the cab. The metal above me creaked, dented under its weight. I could hear it breathing, heavy, slow, deliberate. I knew if I let it inside, I was dead. My eyes darted to the overhead signs, flashing in the distance. A turnoff, a bridge. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel so tight, my knuckles went numb. 30 seconds. That's all I needed. The growling got louder, then claws, scraping against the glass just above my head. It was trying to rip the roof open. I had seconds. I slammed on the brakes. The tires locked up, the whole rig jerking violently. I braced myself as the truck skidded, the trailer swaying wildly behind me. Then, a blur of motion, a snarl, a thud, and silence. I gasped for breath, hands trembling against the wheel. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The weight was gone. I didn't wait to check if it was still there. I hit the gas, speeding toward the bridge, praying that whatever that thing was, it wasn't still chasing me. I didn't stop, not for another 100 miles. By the time I reached a truck stop, dawn was creeping over the horizon. The road behind me looked normal, like nothing had happened. But something had, because when I got out to check the trailer, there were claw marks, deep jagged grooves, slicing through the metal like butter, and smeared across the back doors. A handprint, too large to be human, and in the center, burned into the steel, a single glowing yellow eye. The news broke a few days later. A trucker, some poor guy, had disappeared on Route 47. They found his rig abandoned, still running. No blood, no struggle, just the driver's door, swinging open in the wind, and the snow beneath it, covered in massive footprints. I took a different road after that, never drove 47 again, because I know what's out there. We shouldn't have moved here. I knew it from the first day. The house itself wasn't bad. An old, two-story place with creaky floors and a wraparound porch. It sat on the edge of town, right where the houses thinned out and the forest began. Mom loved it. Dad liked that it was cheap, and my little sister Emma was too young to care. But me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the woods behind the house. Tall, thick trees stretched for miles, their dark canopies swallowing the sky. No trails, no roads, just wilderness. Or maybe it was the way the previous owners left in a hurry. Mom had said they were downsizing, but they left furniture behind, left food in the pantry, like they couldn't wait to get out. That first night, I lay in bed, staring at my window. It faced the backyard, overlooking the endless trees. Something about them bothered me. Too still, too quiet. I drifted off eventually, and that's when the growling started. It was faint at first, distant, like an animal pacing just beyond the trees. Then closer, a low guttural snarl, dragging through the air like something hungry. I shot up, my heart pounding. The room was dark, the moon barely casting light through the blinds. I swallowed hard, creeping toward the window. At first I didn't see anything. Then glowing eyes at the tree line. Yellow, reflective, watching me. I froze. The glowing dots shifted, blinked, and then more appeared. Not just one pair. 4, 6, 8, a dozen pairs of eyes, staring out from the trees. A shape moved between them. Large, tall, too tall. The growling grew louder. A shadow stepped forward. And then, "Go to bed, Tyler." My mom's voice cut through the dark. I turned, startled. When I looked back, the eyes were gone. The woods were empty again, like nothing had ever been there. But I knew what I saw, and something was out there, waiting. The next morning, I checked the backyard. I wasn't expecting to find anything. Maybe a deer trail, some disturbed grass. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, I stopped cold. There were footprints, not boot prints, not deer tracks, something else. They were deep, heavy imprints in the dirt, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen. Wide, clawed, like a wolf's paw, except too long, too stretched. I swallowed hard, and took a step closer. That's when I saw it. Scratch marks, gouged into the wood of the porch. I backed up fast, my heart hammering. This wasn't normal. I ran inside. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think there's something in the woods." He barely looked up from his coffee. "Bears, probably." "These aren't bear tracks," I said, frustrated. "And there's claw marks on the porch." He sighed and set his mug down. "Listen, Ty, we live near the woods now. There's bound to be animals passing through. It's fine." It wasn't fine, but I could tell he wasn't listening. That night, I stayed up late, watching, waiting. The woods were silent. Then snap, a branch breaking somewhere near the trees. I held my breath. Then the growling started again. Slow, deep, circling the house. I crept to the window, barely peeking through the blinds, and I saw them again. The eyes, but this time they were closer, not just at the tree line. In the yard, and something else was there too. A shadow moving between them, tall, looming. My chest tightened. The eyes watched me. Then a hand, a massive clawed hand, reached out from the dark and touched the porch. The wood creaked, the growling deepened. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my bed. Then silence. I didn't move for what felt like hours. The next morning, when I went outside, the claw marks were deeper, like something had been trying to get in. I didn't sleep the next night. I wanted to tell my dad again, but I knew how that conversation would go. He'd brush it off. Bears, coyotes, whatever excuse made him feel safe. But I knew better. So instead, I stayed up, watching. Midnight came. Then one. Then two. For a long time nothing happened. Then, a noise, not growling this time. Scraping. Something clawing at the walls outside. I gripped my blanket, heart hammering. It was right outside my room. I forced myself to move, creeping to the window, barely tilting the blinds, and I saw it. A hand, massive black-clawed fingers, slowly dragging down the wooden siding. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall, taller than any person. I could only see part of it in the moonlight, but its shoulders were hunched, broad fur bristling along its twisted frame. I stared frozen. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It turned its head toward me, and I saw its face, long wolf-like, but wrong, too narrow, too stretched. Its lips curled, revealing jagged yellowed teeth, and its eyes, burning yellow, just like the ones in the woods. A low rumbling growl filled the air. I stumbled backward, my breath ragged. Then footsteps, heavy, slow. It was moving toward the front of the house. I panicked. I ran to my parents' room and banged on the door. "Dad, wake up." A groggy mumble. Then, "Tyler, what the hell?" Then, boom, a loud thud against the front porch. My mom screamed. I ran to the living room just in time to see the front door shake, something massive slamming against it. Dad was awake now. "The hell is that?" he muttered, grabbing the fireplace poker. A deep sniffing sound came from the other side of the door. Then, silence. I held my breath. Dad moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just an inch. Then, his face went pale. He dropped the curtain immediately. He didn't say anything, just locked the door, turned off the lights, and muttered, "Get away from the windows." For the first time, I think he finally believed me. We sat in the dark, barely breathing. The house was silent. The only sound the ticking of the old wall clock. Then, scratch, scratch. Something dragged its claws along the front door. A slow, deliberate testing. Mom was crying softly. Emma was shaking. Dad held the fireplace poker like it would do anything against what was out there. Then a low growl. From the back of the house, I stiffened. There was more than one. The floor creaked behind us. Something was moving on the porch. I wanted to scream, but I clenched my teeth, my entire body locked in fear. Then, boom, the front door shook violently, the wood splintering. Emma whimpered. Dad grabbed the phone, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. But then, footsteps, loud, pounding footsteps, not from inside, from outside, more than one. Then, gunshots. Someone was shooting. The creatures snarled, their heavy steps thundering away from the house. Dad yanked open the curtain. Just for a second, I caught a glimpse of it, a huge hunched figure tearing through the trees, its glowing eyes flicking back toward the house, before disappearing into the darkness.
Itty.
Then, silence. Dad let out a breath. The flashing lights of a police cruiser lit up the yard. Sheriff's deputies came up the porch, guns drawn. We let them inside, shaking, pale, terrified. One of them, a man with graying hair and tired eyes, pulled Dad aside. "You're lucky," he said. "Few folks around here weren't so lucky." Dad frowned. What the hell was that? The deputy hesitated. Then quietly, he said, "We've been hunting it for years, but there's not just one." Dad's face paled. The deputy nodded. "There's a pack. We moved a month later. We never went back. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear the growling, and I know it's still out there. I wanted silence. I got something else. The cabin sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. No cell service, no internet, just an old generator, a fireplace, and stacks of blank notebooks waiting to be filled. It was exactly what I needed. A week alone, no distractions, just me and my writing. The first few days were perfect. The mornings were crisp, the air thick with pine and damp earth. I spent my afternoons writing on the porch, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. At night, I sat by the fireplace, letting the crackling flames drown out the silence. But by the end of the week, things started changing. It started with the claw marks. I woke up one morning, stepped outside with my coffee, and saw them, deep gouges in the wood of the front door. 3 long parallel slashes. At first, I told myself it was a bear. Had to be. But bears don't scratch symbols into trees. And that's what I found next. A circle, carved deep into the bark of a pine tree. Perfectly symmetrical, with long jagged lines stretching out from the center. I didn't touch it. Something about it felt wrong. That night, the scratching started. I was at my desk, struggling with a scene, when I heard it, scruck, a slow, deliberate scrape against the window. I froze. The only light in the cabin came from my desk lamp, casting a dim glow across the wooden walls. The windows were black mirrors, reflecting the inside of the cabin. I couldn't see out, but whatever was out there, it could see me. Scruck. The sound came again, higher this time, closer. I grabbed the flashlight and forced myself to step toward the window. The beam cut through the darkness. At first I saw nothing, just trees, the empty yard, the deep black woods. Then, eyes reflecting the light, too high off the ground, too many of them. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat, and then, from the trees, a low rasping growl. Something was watching me, and it wasn't alone. I shut the blinds, my pulse hammered in my ears, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. I didn't know what I'd just seen, couldn't know. My mind refused to accept it. Too tall, too wrong, and those eyes, they weren't human. I backed away from the window, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The scratching had stopped, but I knew whatever was out there was still watching. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I knew that already, but checking felt necessary, like I still had some kind of control. I didn't. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I moved toward the fireplace, throwing more wood into the flames, watching them grow taller, hotter. Fire meant safety. At least that's what I told myself. Then, thump, something heavy hit the porch. I stopped breathing, my eyes locked on the front door. The wood creaked under slow, deliberate weight. Footsteps. No, not footsteps. Something dragging itself across the porch. I gripped the fire poker, my fingers slick with sweat. My mind screamed, "Don't open the door." But I had to see. I had to know. I inched forward, barely tilting the blinds. The porch was empty, but the claw marks on the door were deeper now, fresher. And then, a sound behind me. Not outside, inside. A slow, wet breath. I turned too fast, nearly falling over. The flashlight beam shook as I scanned the room. Nothing. The cabin was empty. The fire crackled. The walls groaned. I was alone, but I knew that was a lie. Something had been inside, and I had let it in. The cabin felt wrong now, like something had shifted in the air. Something invisible but heavy, pressing down on my chest. I kept telling myself I was alone, but I wasn't. The scratches on the inside of the window told me that. I took slow steps back, gripping the fire poker like it would actually do something. The flames flickered, throwing erratic shadows along the wooden walls. Every creak of the cabin felt like breathing, every whisper of wind like a voice I couldn't quite hear. I needed to get out, but I couldn't go into the woods, not after what I saw. Then, knocking, soft, slow on the back door. My whole body went cold. I turned toward the sound, my legs stiff, the cabin floor creaking beneath me. The back door was solid oak, No windows, just thick old wood separating me from whatever was knocking. Knock and knock, knock and knock. A pause. Then, a voice. Let me in. My skin crawled. It wasn't a normal voice. It was wrong, too low, like something mimicking speech but not getting it quite right. I backed away, my breath hitching. Then I remembered the symbols on the trees. Someone else had been here before me. Someone else had tried to keep this thing out. I ran for my notebook, flipping through my pages, digging through my bag for a pen. I wasn't religious, didn't know any ancient spells or chants, but I knew patterns had power. That's why the symbols were carved into the trees. They weren't random. They were a warning. I grabbed my knife, my hands shaking, and I carved one into the door. The knocking stopped. I held my breath, my fingers digging into the wood. Silence. Then, a slow, deep growl from the other side. I stepped back, heart hammering, and then I heard it move away. Not walking, crawling, something big, heavy, dragging itself along the walls of the cabin. I clenched my fists. This thing wasn't leaving. It was waiting, and I had until sunrise to survive. The air was thick with silence, not the kind of peaceful quiet I had come here for. This was something else, something that felt alive, like the woods, the cabin. The air itself was watching me, waiting. I pressed my back against the wall, my fingers still gripping the knife. The symbol I had carved into the door felt important, but I didn't know if it would hold. The thing outside was still there. I could hear it breathing, long, slow inhales, smelling the air. Then, scratch, scratch, scratch. It was carving something back into the wood. I swallowed hard, sweat dripping down my back. This wasn't an animal. It wasn't human either. And whatever it was, it understood me. I glanced at the fire, still burning but lower now. I needed to last until sunrise. If fire kept it at bay, I needed more of it. I moved fast, shoving every piece of wood I had left into the flames. The fire roared higher, casting flickering shadows along the walls. Then, for the first time all night, I heard it move away. Not fast, not running, just a slow, lumbering retreat. I listened, my breath shallow, until the sound of its dragging footsteps disappeared into the woods. But I didn't let my guard down. I sat by the fire, gripping the knife, staring at the door until the first light of morning touched the trees. Only then did I dare to move. The first thing I saw when I stepped outside was the new carving on the door. It was a symbol, not like mine. Something older, something that looked like an eye, watching. I turned, scanning the tree line. The woods were quiet, peaceful, like nothing had ever been there. But I knew better. I packed my things and left the cabin that morning. I never came back. Some places are meant to stay forgotten. Holloway Mine had been closed for decades. Everyone in town knew the story, how the tunnels had collapsed in 1952, trapping an entire shift of miners underground. They never found the bodies. No rescues, no recoveries, just darkness swallowing them whole. The company shut it down after that, condemned it. But we weren't there for the history. We were there for the thrill. Me, Danny, Olivia, Mark, Cassie, and Jordan, urban explorers. We had done abandoned hospitals, tunnels, ghost towns. This was just another adventure. Or at least that's what we thought. We reached the mine just after sundown. A rusted fence surrounded the entrance, covered in faded warning signs. Keep out, collapse risk, danger. Danny was the first one through. He always was. Come on guys, don't chicken out now. His grin was wide in the moonlight. One by one we slipped inside. The entrance tunnel was massive. Old railway tracks stretching into the dark rusted beams overhead, holding up the weight of the mountain. The air was stale, and it smelled wrong. Not just like damp earth or rusting metal, like something rotting. Cassie wrinkled her nose. Smells like something died down here. Olivia nudged her. Maybe we'll find bones. Jordan laughed. Wouldn't be the first time. We walked deeper. The darkness swallowed us, our flashlights bouncing off the damp rock walls. The further we went, the more the air changed. Thicker, colder. And then, something moved. Not us. Further down the tunnel, a low scuffling sound like claws on stone. I stopped. Did you hear that? No one answered. I turned my light toward the darkness ahead. The tunnel stretched forward, endless, untouched for years. Nothing visible. Then, a breath, low, deep, from the darkness ahead. Jordan laughed, but it was forced. Probably an animal. Danny smirked. What kind of animal lives in a mine? Then, boom, a loud thud from the tunnel behind us. We spun around. Nothing, just darkness. Something had moved behind us. The silence was heavy now, and I realized something. The cave was too quiet. No wind, no distant water dripping, no echoes of our footsteps, just breathing. And then, a pair of eyes opened in the dark. Not human, yellow, glowing, too high off the ground, too wrong. I grabbed Danny's arm. We need to go. Now, but it was too late, because it had already started moving toward us. And it wasn't afraid of the dark. The eyes didn't blink, just two glowing orbs burning in the dark, locked onto us like they were memorizing our faces. Then it moved. Not a step, not a stumble, a lunge. Something big and fast tore through the tunnel toward us. Danny shouted, scrambling backward. Olivia screamed. Mark dropped his flashlight. I didn't see the whole thing, just glimpses. A massive shape, hunched but still too tall. Its arms swinging in unnatural jerky movements as it charged. And its teeth, flashes of yellow jagged fangs. Too long for its mouth, too sharp, meant for tearing. We ran. I grabbed Cassie's arm, yanking her toward the tunnel entrance. I could hear Mark panting behind me, Jordan shouting, Olivia sobbing. Danny was still too close to it. Move, move, Jordan shouted. Danny tried. God, he tried. But it was too fast. Something snapped. A sickening wet crunch echoed through the tunnel. Danny screamed. I risked a glance back. I shouldn't have. The thing had him. Its massive clawed hand was wrapped around his leg, yanking him backward into the dark. Danny clawed at the rocks, leaving bloody smears in the dirt. Help me. We grabbed him. Mark and I latched onto his arms, pulling, pulling, pulling. Rapee. Danny vanished into the dark. The screaming stopped. His flashlight rolled across the ground, still on. For a moment, the tunnel was silent. Then, that thing laughed. A low, guttural chuckle. That wasn't human, wasn't right. Cassie started sobbing. It took him. Olivia shook her head violently. We have to keep moving. Now. We ran. The tunnels twisted, closing in around us. Everything looked the same. Cassie was hyperventilating, mumbling something under her breath. Mark was gripping his flashlight so tight, his knuckles went white. It's playing with us, Olivia whispered. It's leading us deeper. I didn't want to believe it, but I did. The further we ran, the worse the air smelled. Rot, something long dead. And then we saw them. Claw marks, not small ones. Massive jagged gouges in the tunnel walls. Whatever it was, it had been down here a long time. Then Mark stopped. His flashlight was shaking. Guys, he whispered. I turned and felt my stomach drop. A pile of bones, half buried in the dirt. Not just animal bones, human. Danny wasn't the first one it took, and he wouldn't be the last. Then, something growled from behind us. Low, deep, too close. We weren't alone, and we weren't getting out. The growl sent shivers through my spine. It was behind us, close. Cassie froze, her sobs turning into silent horror. Mark was whispering prayers, his grip shaking on the flashlight. None of us turned around. We didn't need to, because we could hear it, breathing, long deep inhales, like it was smelling us, tasting us. I didn't think. I grabbed Cassie's arm and ran. The others followed, our footsteps thundering through the tunnels. And it followed, not running, crawling. I could hear its claws scraping against the stone, the sick wet sound of limbs moving wrong. And then, Cassie tripped. She went down hard, her scream echoing through the tunnels. We turned to help her. And that's when it struck. A blur of motion, a massive black shape lunging from the dark. It grabbed her. I saw her face, her eyes wide in horror. I reached for her. I almost had her. Then, she was gone, yanked into the dark. Her scream cut off too fast. And then, That laughter again, a low rumbling chuckle, that made my stomach twist. Mark and Olivia were hyperventilating. "We have to go," Olivia whispered. I knew she was right. Cassie was gone, just like Danny, and if we didn't move now, we would be next. We kept running. The tunnel twisted, forcing us downward. It was leading us somewhere. Then, up ahead, a light, not bright, not daylight, moonlight, a hole in the collapsed rock. The way out, Mark sobbed, "We're gonna make it." Then he screamed. Something ripped him backward. I turned, just for a second, and I saw it. The Dogman, massive, hunched, a monstrous wolf-like face, jaws too wide, teeth glistening, yellow eyes burning in the dark, smiling. Then, Mark was gone. His flashlight clattered to the ground. Blood smeared the rocks. Olivia grabbed me. "Go." We ran for our lives. We dove through the gap. The cold night air hit us like ice. We scrambled away from the mine entrance, tripping over rocks, too scared to stop running. We didn't stop running. We didn't even turn around. The night air hit like a blast of ice, but I barely felt it, too numb, too shaken. My chest burned. My legs screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop. Olivia was right beside me, sobbing, gasping, her hands smeared with dirt and blood that wasn't hers. The mine was silent now, but we knew it was still watching us, waiting. We stumbled back into town at dawn, covered in scratches, dust, and shock. We must have looked half dead when we made it to the police station. The officer behind the desk blinked at us, straightening in his chair. "Jesus, what the hell happened to you two?" My voice cracked. I tried again. "Our friends, we went to Holloway Mine. Something got them." His expression changed instantly, from tired annoyance to something darker, like he already knew. Olivia couldn't even speak. She just sobbed into her hands. The officer stood. "You went into that mine?" His voice was low, angry. I nodded, shaking. "Danny, Mark, Cassie, they're still down there. We have to go back." His jaw clenched. He grabbed the radio on his belt. "Chief, we've got a problem." Within minutes, the station was a storm of activity. Squad cars, flashing lights, deputies arming themselves. A search team was sent out immediately. Olivia and I rode in the back of a cruiser, wrapped in blankets, still in shock. I prayed they'd find something, that our friends had somehow survived. But deep down I knew better. The search took 2 days. They found no bodies, no clothing, no backpacks, nothing. It was like Danny, Cassie, and Mark had never been there at all. Except they did find something. Near the collapsed tunnel, blood smeared against the rock in thick, jagged streaks. And beside it, claw marks, massive, deep, carved into the stone. The sheriff ordered the mine sealed completely. A new fence, reinforced steel. The entrances caved in with explosives, like they thought that would stop it, like they thought that would bury what was inside. They called it an accident, said our friends must have fallen into a deeper section of the mine, that their bodies were lost underground. But I know the truth, we both do. Something was down there, something took them, and I know it's still waiting for the next people stupid enough to go inside.